Much has been said about the deafening silence from South Africa and SADC on the situation in Zimbabwe. Our neighbour has been in a state of chaos for almost 2 decades now. But is there anything that South Africa can do, and what exactly is South Africa's policy towards Zimbabwe? I'm joined now by Dr. Ibbo Mandaza. He's a founding trustee of the Southern African Political Economy series. He joins us from Zimbabwe. We're also joined in the conversation by political analyst Professor David Moore. A very good afternoon to both my guests. And I guess, Professor Moore, let me start with you. We can say that at least South Africa has come out to say something as of this morning, right? So we understand, or we've been made to understand, that as recent as on Tuesday, the two ministers, that being the Minister of International Relations in South Africa and her counterpart in Zimbabwe, had a conversation, and South Africa expressed its readiness to assist in the situation. Is this enough?
Well, yes, and there was a memo sent out by Durko to that effect. I suppose it's an initial stage for something which could be a little bit more substantive. I noticed also on ENCA you interviewed Ace Mafushula, who I think the last time he went up to Zimbabwe was in January, the end of January 2019, when there was a massive, chaotic 17 people killed and many women raped and so on. And, you know, the official statements of goodwill and supporting a fellow liberation party, all that sort of stuff went on. So we really haven't seen too much yet.
Dr. Mandaza, how would you characterize South Africa's posture towards Zimbabwe?
Very ambivalent, indecisive, probably reflecting an incapacity to deal with the issue. And also a level of ignorance, I would say, of the realities in Zimbabwe and how South Africa might assist. What do I mean by that? I think the first thing that should be done, if South Africa is serious, and SADC, is for heaven's sake to stop the violence, the abductions, the torture. That's the first thing. And that all that it requires is Ramaphosa to phone his counterpart in Harare and go public on it. It's not enough just to, you know, to pussyfoot around when people are dying and people are being abducted. So we'd expect, first and foremost, for the neighborhood to wave the red flag. In the first instance, to stop the abductions, the violence, the torture of young activists. That must stop.
Dr.
And especially in the conditions that we have, the conditions that we have of COVID, arresting people, put them into crowded prison conditions, exposed to the COVID, it's criminal in my view.
Dr. Mandaza, just how far can South Africa go here? A number of interventions have been, attempted in terms of bringing about some sort of dialogue in Zimbabwe, especially amongst fractured political parties. Yet we still find ourselves in the situation in 2020. Much has been said about the people of Zimbabwe lifting themselves from the ashes. Your response?
That argument is facile in my view, especially when it comes from South Africans. We must remember that in South Africa, what liberated South Africa, what helped, was the global movement against apartheid, the sanctions against apartheid South Africa. They've forgotten that. The solidarity globally. And you want to say that Zimbabweans must themselves raise themselves from the ashes. Yes, a lot is happening, but how long shall we stand by and watch abductions, torture, killings, while arguing that Zimbabweans must solve their own problems? It's a facile argument, especially if it comes from South Africa.
Professor Moore, hearing what Dr. Mandaza said, there is a point there, but does South Africa have capacity? We're facing internal problems that seem to have tied our own leaders' hands.
Well, it's, as my friend Ibbo has said, it might just take a phone call. there seems to be a binary argument that is made by many people in South Africa. You know, do we want the troops to go to South Africa? Well, it doesn't take quite that much. I've had sort of a fantasy recently that perhaps the South African government foreign policy makers should have a commission of inquiry, something like the Zondo Commission, except it would be just allowed to act for 1 week so they could make a decision in 1 week. And all the people who have made foreign policy decisions in South Africa could be subjected to grilling by interested parties, civil society, analysts, maybe some Zimbabweans, over where they've gone wrong in the past, because there have been so many interventions made that have been quiet or silent or even underground, you know, sort of secretive, that have failed. So there's been such a list of failures and unaccountable failures in the past, where, you know, in 2002, when the first election observation team went up there and said it was fantastic, but then a second committee went up, and it took 14 years before that committee's report was ever released. All that the South African policymakers had to do in 2002 was say, look, the election was unfair. What are you going to do about it? So they've got to be a little bit more public about this secretive process of diplomacy than they have been. Because South African citizens don't really know what has been going on. And there's been such discussion today and last couple of days over the media and the radio about the problems here that I think South Africans themselves are very, very concerned. And this is just another sort of nail in well, it's not quite the coffin yet, of the ANC. But, you know, you have the EFF taking the carpet under the feet. Let's close down the embassy. What are you doing paying off white farmers when everybody's starving? So the discourse is being taken up in civil society much more than within the state. The state looks like a real, you know, doesn't know what to do, like as Ibbo says, doesn't have the capacity. And then I think, you know, there could be a few carrots. You could perhaps stop people coming over the border, and therefore those people they'd have to go back to to Zimbabwe perhaps, and really, you know, wouldn't have that outlet of South Africa. That might be a bit harsh, but also, you know, some proposals about getting people back to the table again, like they did in 2008, only after well over 100 people were killed in the aftermath of the March 2008 election, and the second one, which was a total disaster. It was only after that disaster that Thabo Mbeki went in and said, look, let's hammer together the GNU. So I think we need to think about the past and think about what lessons we've learned from the past to very quickly make a firm decision about what action to take. Because the whole global community is actually quite, in a very interesting way, over the state of security that was established on July 31st, which, by the way, when Patrick Chinamasa made his speech on the Monday before the 31st, he basically gave a green light to militia to come in and, you know, mess up all these civil society activists. That was an incitement to killing, which is really, really, really something. And now Emerson Mnangagwa and the regime have just are putting forth a new act which makes it illegal for any party to speak against the interests of Zimbabwe. So, you know, we have like his speech a couple of days ago, who are these dark forces and so on, which are actually more pointed towards his own party and the conflicts therein than to, you know, the United States. So we have a party which is in crisis, a society which is in crisis, and it's on our border. It's on South Africa's border. It's going to spill over. It's in South Africa's interests in terms of realist political science, realist international relations. It's not an idealist thing to go over there and help, you know, because it's a nice thing to do. It's in South Africa's interest to take some pretty quick action.
Right. Dr. Mandaza, in closing up the conversation, from the brief history that you mentioned in terms of the help that other countries on the continent had offered to South Africa back then, do you feel that the country is betraying its neighbor when it needs it the most?
Well, I just think that the South Africa's policy on Zimbabwe, as I said earlier on, is improvement. It is not true that South Africa has not intervened in Zimbabwe. It has done so a number of times. For example, David Moore just mentioned 2008. There was a campaign report, and there was a campaign report in 2002. There was a general's report on the violence in 2008. To this day, that report has not been released or published. More recently, 2017 coup. There is enough evidence to show the complicit conduct of South Africa in the coup. And I think to that extent, South Africa may be constrained from dealing with Mnangagwa, having given him refuge from the throne of Mugabe. And you saw the photograph of Mnangagwa and Zuma before Mnangagwa was installed 3 days later. We also know that Mnangagwa may have met a number of other officials during that period. So I think this kind of duplicitous conduct does help to constrain South Africa's conduct towards Zimbabwe. I mean, for example, everyone is boasting about this statement from DECO this morning. And Naledi Pandor, among other things, after expressing concern about what's happening in Zimbabwe, goes on to suggest, please let us know how we can help. My question is, help in what regard? Help to stop the violence? What is the help about? And that's why I said the policy of South Africa is very ambivalent to a point of, and all we're asking, I don't want to go into a long debate about why South Africa can't do what it's supposed to do, let alone SADC itself, because SADC doesn't even exist anymore for most of us. It's a dead horse, so to speak. But I'm saying that the list can be done. Why wait for the UN human rights, the UN Secretary General? People far afield, including the Trumps and the Europeans generally, to raise alarm about the violence and atrocities in Harare. When your own neighbor, South Africa, is quiet about it. Belated murmurs, which are meaningless at the end of the day, if there's no requisite action to be taken. A red flag must be raised about what's happening in Harare. A red flag must be raised about the fact that we have a military state in Zimbabwe. There's no, in the whole region, there's no state which is militarized like ours. And everyone's getting used to the normal. The abnormal, if I may say.
Thank you very much to both our guests this afternoon, Dr. Ibbo Mandaza and political analyst, Professor David Moore.